Hello everybody, welcome to my video. Today I'm going to be making my very own speedometer. I want to make a mobile app that can function as a speedometer, but I don't want it to make like any other app you'd find on Google Play. I want to have an app that has some really good looking speedometers and also that has a system that lets the user create their very own personalized speedometer. Let's get into this. I got this idea as I've always been passionate by bike speedometers. I have a whole bunch of kinds from digital to analog. And I've also tried those mobile app speedometers, but those ones are worse. They almost always are GPS based and they look so bland. So today we're going to be making an app that allows me to make a speedometer look like whatever I would like with essentially infinite customization and also make it work off of a system that works better than GPS. So I'm going to be making this in Unity as it's the engine I know the best, and to clarify a little bit on what I mean by infinite customization, what I want is for you to select one of many speedometer elements like an analog one, a digital one, so on, and for you to place it wherever on the screen and also to be able to modify its properties. Like for example, setting the max speed on an analog speedometer, whether it's 50 or 240. What color it has, what color does the needle have, and so on. Well, before I could actually start making the app itself, I needed to first find an alternative to using GPS as the actual speedometer. And after doing some research, there are a lot of these bike speedometers that work by sending Bluetooth signals, and then an app takes these signals and determines at what speed you're going on based on how many revolutions per second you're getting. This being said, I decided to buy one of those Bluetooth speedometers, this one in particular working in some gyroscope system that determined its rotation based on the Earth's magnetic field. And I also decided to buy a bike phone stand as I would need to hold the phone onto the bike like a proper speedometer. To clarify a little bit, these speedometers work on Bluetooth low energy, and the thing is that Unity doesn't natively support this. So I got an extension off of the Unity asset store to make this function. Once I got it working, I made a little interface to test out the speed it was getting. However, it seemed to have a problem. The speed would never go above 10 kilometers an hour, and when it was lower than that, the only values it was getting was 3 or 5. Why? Well, it has to do with how these speedometers work. Initially, I thought it was just send a signal whenever it did a full revolution, and I could just keep track of when I got that, then wait for the next one, and from there calculate the speed obtained from those two timestamps. But in reality, these speedometers work on an internal clock, and whenever a certain interval of time passed, it would send a signal back to the phone, but this would mean that the speed we were going was very imprecise, like how it was when I first tried it. The thing is that these signals also contain some data. The number of resolutions and the last revolution time. We can calculate the amount of ticks in a timestamp and the last tick time based on the revolution. And with these two variables, we can calculate the speed we were going at. Once we put all these things together in a script, we get the exact speed we're going at with great precision and little delay. Now that I got it working, I decided to start working on the actual app now. What I want is a system of presets that the user creates and can use at any time, and when creating the preset, you can choose from a bunch of pre-made templates if you don't want to make your own. The first thing I added was an analog speedometer. I felt like this would be the best place to start as there's a lot of customization that can be done on one of these. At the moment, I added the following properties to the speedometer that you can customize. Where the speedometer starts and ends, its background and outline color, a slider on how these two color lines are divided, and also their color and thickness, a bunch of settings on the needle and the speedometer, including its base, and then some setting on how the marking works. You can set its max speed, where the secondary mark color starts, how often it's marked, and how many smaller lines are placed in between the bigger marks. Next, I added what pairs best with a speedometer, and that's an odometer. I was aiming to make it look like one found in analog speedometers like the one we just made, and it turned out great. And besides total kilometers, it can also show you a bunch of other stuff. The only problem with at this point, the only other thing you could customize is the total amount of digits, its refresh rate, and whether it had a decimal or not. It wasn't even animated, I just had some static numbers on it, but we'll come to animate these later on. After this, I decided to make an LCD speedometer, as seen on some of the digital speedometers I already have. To make those 7-segment displays, aka the numbers, I decided to use a 7-segment font. The one I used is the DSEG font family. It's exactly what I needed and also had a bunch of variations like the 14-segment fonts. So I decided to add all of them. And the user can choose the font used. The user can modify the amount of digits the speedometer had if it had a decimal its side, and the color of the digits and its background. The thing is that this didn't look like an actual LCD display, and that's where we need three things. One, it needs to have the effect of LCD burning, aka for every digit it needs to have a subtle ghost of the character with all the segments visible. This can be observed by looking at an actual LCD at a specific angle. Two, it needs to have some inner shadow. On any LCD I've seen, it always has some borders taller than the display, and this causes some inner shadow to appear. And this can be easily done with a texture behind the digits. And number three, the digits need to fade out when changed. You may have noticed that on some LCDs, it takes a while for the unused segments to fully disappear, but new ones appear instantly. This is very easy to add, as all I would need is the text with the current speed and store the variable of the last speed, place that on a text above the regular one, and fade it out slowly. The result is that the new digits appear instantly and the old ones fade out slowly. I've also made it so that the user can modify these LCD effects, so you can have all of them, none of them, or just some. And they can be further customized by setting, for example, the shadow opacity, burn opacity, or fade in time. With these three things combined, the element looks very close to an actual LCD display would look like. With that done, I also made an LCD display, basically the same thing as the LCD speedometer, but this time you can show other stuff, just like the analog display we just made. This time you can add as many decimals as you'd like, as the whole thing is just a single text, and by adding some of the LCD effects as the speedometer, this one looked good as well. So with these four elements done, now we can create some actual speedometers in the app. I decided to fill up the entire screen, all the available data to ourselves. Besides that one, I also decided to make one using the analog elements as well. First up, I entered the editor quickly to make a preset. I wanted to test the speedometer, so I made the speedometer and then I connected the speedometer to it. The speedometer did work, so then I decided to make a better looking preset and then go outside and test it. Outside, the speedometer was working just as expected, and its latency was pretty good. Of course, when slowing down or accelerating, there was a delay, but that's always going to be present anywhere you try this. I also wanted to see just how much speed the speedometer can read before it starts to fail, so I attached it to this drill to see how much it can gain. So the limit seems to be 650 RPM, and that's more than enough for a simple bike. Other than that, not much to say. Let's go back to the drawing board a little bit to add some more stuff to it. At this point, we can't really make a lot of interesting stuff anyway, so what we need is to add some more elements. But before that, we need to fix a big problem. The experience of actually using the speedometer was great, however the process of making the preset in the editor was very bad. There isn't any kind of snapping, and it was so hard to make anything look good because it was not aligned in any way. And another glaring problem is whenever you select an object, then another of the same kind, all of the properties from the previous one go to the selected one and it overrides it. Before the snapping, I added three things: center snapping, 2 edge-to-edge snapping, and 3 rotation snapping. Now that making the preset is a lot easier than it was before, and what I added next was something I like to call a speed bar. Basically, you have a needle that moves left and right based on your speed. Kind of like a flat speedometer. It has all the same customization as an analog speedometer, like background and outline color, needle properties, and how much the object is marked. I also added a fill mode, so the needle fills the background as it moves across it. The only problem I had with it was just pretty basic, but what would make it a lot more interesting if it was circular. This is not the same element, this is now a circular analog display, and it has the exact same settings. The only difference is that the flat one has width and height, and this one has fill percentage and thickness instead. To make the gap in the speedometer, I just use another circle that has the same color as the background. Now we can stack one of these with the analog speedometer and it looks super cool. With these two made, I wanted to make some kind of LCD counterparts of these two elements. So first I made an LCD speed bar. It's the LCD background with a bunch of segments that light up based on your current speed. For this element, you can only modify the amount of segments it has in the max speed, being the speed where all the segments would be lit. However, you still have all the LCD effects from the speedometer, like the burn and transitions of the segment. And again, just like the analog speedometers, I decided to add a circular version of this with all the same settings. Just size properties are different. And now we have a proper circular speedometer, even for an LCD display. Now I decided to make some non-speedometer related elements. The first thing I added was a line object. It works exactly how you'd think. It's just a line you can rotate, scale, and as for properties, the only thing you can modify is its width, color. After that I added a text component. This behaves just like Unity's text object, and I essentially just put all the same properties as the text object onto mine. Like paragraph settings and for fonts, I just added 5 preloaded fonts that they were also free to use. But for now, the text only had one color. At this point, I felt like I had enough elements to start making some pre-made templates. As I said earlier on, these are just pre-made presets that you can select when creating the preset, and it just puts all the components for you. The first preset I decided to make was essentially the same exact one as I made myself when I was doing the first testing session. However, besides all the LCD elements, I also decided to add some text and these lines to better categorize all the stuff. Next, I made a simpler one with the slightly curved speedometer and another LCD speedometer. I also added these 2 bottom displays as the odometer and the other one for total time. And finally, some lines to split it better. After that, I decided to add some more stuff before I started making more presets. And the one thing I had on my mind was adding text effects. Initially, I didn't know how you could have such a thing on Unity's text element, but the reality is that Unity's Text Mesh Pro system has a bunch of effects that come with it and I could use. So I started by making the UI for the menu. I wanted to base off the menu of effects in Photopea, where you would have these buttons with toggles on them for each effect, and in my case these would expand when clicked on. Initially there were 2 main layers, the body and the stroke, and each of these had some main properties like color, text dilatation, and softness. And then 2 more submenus in each main category, with the actual effects that also have toggles and expand and contract. The 2 effects available in Text Mesh Pro are Bevel and Glow. With the UI made, now I just needed to make the actual effects work in code. Now, it was not clear to me on how I set these properties on the Text Mesh Pro object, but in reality it's just a material, so all the properties had to set via the name of the property, and it was not fun guessing and searching for these names. Eventually I got everything done, and I also made a system to not make all the text objects have the same text effects, as using a shared material will do that. And when I finally got everything done, I'm gonna test it out on my phone, and only some of the effects were working. Well, why? On mobile, the app doesn't use the same Text Mesh Pro materials like on PC. It uses a mobile version of these materials, and they are essentially the same, just without any of the special effects like Bevel and Glow. So I had to sacrifice all the special effects, and I was only left with the main effects. And still, even with these 2, the system I was using was one material for the body and another for the stroke, so I wasn't limited to the material stroke. And with this, I could simulate glow with the softness of the stroke. Also, I know in Text Mesh Pro also could show images on text, but again, that just isn't available on the mobile version of the Text Mesh Pro materials. After adding the text effects and testing on mobile, I started testing this in different scenarios, and I felt like it's not a good idea to restrict this just to Bluetooth, as not very many people have this kind of speedometer, so I decided to add the ability to use GPS as an alternative to the Bluetooth mode. To make GPS work on the speedometer, we will use Unity's input.location function that gets us the real-time position on the device in coordinates. Then we store that last position before we get the active one, make the difference, and then we get how much the device moved. Almost all phones update their GPS 1 time a second, so we just have to transform those coordinates into actual units of measurement, and then finally turn that into an actual speed. With that done, I just made some UI in the settings menu so you can change the mode at any time, and then some UI that appears when the app is open for the first time so the user can set what mode they want. After adding the GPS function, I decided to make a very important component, the image component. This is straightforward as it's gonna get, as this is just a component where the user loads an image either from their phone or from a URL. Besides just the image, the way it's displayed can be customized. Instead of having the image stretch over a set size, you can tile it, for example. All the effects available are just Unity's built-in image component display modes. You got Simple, which just stretches the image over any size, Sliced, which takes an image, cuts it up into 9 pieces, and then the corners stay the exact same size, the edges stretch on one axis, and the center stretches freely. Tiled is the same as sliced, but nothing is stretched. It's tiled instead. And if it isn't sliced, it just tiles like a website background, for example. And finally, the filled mode. This one is the most interesting, as you can make an image be partially filled, like in a pie chart kind of way. And besides that, you can also have a semicircle filling, corner filling, and just on the horizontal and vertical axes. After this, I decided to add another component, a compass. Every phone comes with a built-in compass, and since Unity also has input.compass, it was also very easy to implement. Also make it look like a real compass with those iconic NSW lines. You can also set the compass colors on basically every component of it, what details on the design are available, and definitely the most interesting option, make it look 3D. And with that, I also added this cool effect where marks fade in and out and only show when they are close enough to the compass needle. Now that I added this compass element, my initial plan shifted a little bit. I wanted now to be able to create elements like at the level of a car dashboard, and one very important thing would be a music player. So I initially planned on making two modes. The first being that it just looks in your phone for songs to play like in a folder or something, like in an older car with an SD card for example. And the second method was by getting them online from Google Drive links, as Unity can use a function that gets songs from your Google Drive link, but not directly. It needs to be converted into a valid string that it can get data from. However, before I could do any of that, I needed to think about how the actual music player was gonna look like. And I had a lot of options. Either keep one single design, have multiple available designs the user can choose from, which both would have been good, but I decided to use none of those and instead make another editor inside the already existing editor. Now this editor is gonna have a lot less customization than the actual preset editor, as you still have sort order, positioning, scale, and a bunch of other stuff based on the element selected, but they have nowhere near the amount of customization as the preset elements. For starters, I had 3 button types: play, skip forward or backward, and track forward and backward button. After these, I added a playback slider, then also added 2 more buttons, a loop button and a back button. This back button goes to another menu, only available when actually using the element. This is the real menu where you can select the song you want to play. After those elements, I started adding some more unique elements like a spectrogram, a scope, and a vector scope. So I made a base design that was gonna appear when you add the element, and from there you could customize it yourself. At this point, I had absolutely all the elements that ended up in the final version, and since I've reached that point, I decided to test the app for the second time to see how it would be for mobile at this stage. So I am back to the editor, this time making a much better looking preset with some more elements on it besides just displays and a speedometer. And when testing, there wasn't much to say about it. It still worked the same way as it was the first time. However, since I added the GPS mode, I wanted to see the difference between the two modes. So I decided to see how much latency there was for each mode when I slowed down and accelerated. First up was the Bluetooth mode. This had about the same delay when slowing down and accelerating. Now, for the GPS mode, it had about the same time for slowing down, but when accelerating, it struggled to keep up. So after that testing session, I concluded some problems, but the most important one was the fact that it's still hard to position and scale elements to the exact size you want. I know I added snapping, but I didn't ever add any scale snapping, so I decided to add a better method of scaling and positioning items, and that was making a PC-like UI, where you would just enter the X and Y position values, the object scale and rotation, instead of just having to manually trying to move them around. Now, besides this, I also had some problems with some of the elements, but instead of modifying just those elements, I decided to modify and add features to almost all of the elements that I've made so far. I started with the first element, which was the analog speedometer, and I extended its limits. At first, you can only start from 25% and end at 75%, but I doubled that so you can now have a more unique speedometer, like one in a corner. Besides that, I also made the user be able to change the marking font, as initially this was just stuck to the initial Tahoma font, which was a much needed change. Now I also decided to make it also display different values, and by that I mean RPM. This is the only value that is not 100% dependent on speed, as it also depends on the wheel diameter. So it gives different values from user to user. The last thing I added was a label that shows what units it's showing, either kilometers an hour, miles per hour, or RPM. Next up was the analog display. This one was in the worst shape, as there was little to no customization you could do on it, and it really didn't look very good. The main thing holding me back was the dark texture. If given a color, it would not have anywhere near enough brightness. So after thinking, I decided to use a light texture if you have any color that isn't black. But if it is, then you have the actual dark texture. Then I made the text have custom colors for the main text and for the decimal, and also made it able to change the text font for this as well. However, the main problem was the text was totally static, and it didn't look like an actual odometer, so I needed to animate it. So I decided to use the following method. I would have two text elements on one digit. The first one is pivoted to the top of the digit, and the second one would be pivoted to the bottom. And based on the digit progress, the top one would shrink on the y-axis, giving it the illusion like it's being rotated forward. And the result was very nice. I know that for an odometer which has a slow rising value, the effect is not very impressive, but when you go through it very fast, it looks very cool. After that, I had the LCD speedometer. Now, besides adding RPM as a unit, I initially had trouble of thinking of anything I could add to this element, but while testing it a bit, I thought the digit proportion is a bit off, and it would be cool if I could make it slimmer or wider. Now the problem is that this is a font and not separate objects, so I could not manually scale them down, but then I got an idea. In Unity, you can have an outline element that you can put on any UI object and it would make a clone of itself. But the idea is, what if I could make a separate script that works like an outline and is controlled to make clones of it in the directions I want? The main idea is that if I scale the digit down on the y-axis and then make some clones using the makeshift outline system that puts clones on the left and right side, it would make the edges that were shorter now be in proportion with the other ones. Finally, I just added this onto the LCD speedometer element along with a toggle to disable this effect, so you can just have the shrunk down digits without the proportion. Now for the LCD display, again, besides adding RPM as a unit and also adding the slimmer LCD digit design, then I got this idea. Earlier on in development, I had an idea for a pixelated LCD display that could display your speed, but that idea was scrapped, and I also wanted to be able to imitate those simple Arduino LCD displays. And after a bit of research, somebody made a font that looks almost identical to the one actually used on those Arduino displays. There's only one real problem with it though, and that was it wasn't monospaced. On DSEG fonts, I could just use them as is because they were 100% monospaced. But this one was not, and I had some options, but I decided the best one was just to modify it myself to make it monospaced. And besides that, I made the hashtag symbol have all the pixels lit up. With the font ready, I added some UI so you can change between the DSEG fonts and this one. With the script done, I decided to also keep the LCD digit scale system, as it would give it a cool effect without modifying anything. But I couldn't have this just on the display, so I decided to implement this onto the speedometer as well. For the analog and LCD speed bars, besides adding RPM as another unit, I really just didn't have any idea what else to add to them, but for the circular variant of both these elements, I made it so you can make them go counterclockwise instead. For the line object, I made it so you can modify its length besides just its width. For the text object, I also added the DSEG fonts and the Matrix Sans font. And in the text object's text category, I added another dynamic mode. This mode works exactly like a display. It shows some variable like current speed, an odometer, and so on, but as a text object. You still have maximum digits, decimal points, and refresh rate, but you don't have the background and the burn. However, you still have all the text effects exclusive to the text object. Now for the last object, the music player, I thought of another element I could add a current song name displayer, an object that shows the name of the song currently playing. This wasn't hard, but I needed to do something if the name was too long to fit in the box. So I added the only logical fix to this problem, an animation that scrolls the name from right to left. And also, besides that infinite scroll animation, you also got ping pong animation that does the same thing, just it alternates the direction once it gets to one end. Now I added the regular fonts, however besides those I also added the deseg fonts and the Matrix Sans one. Now this was the last element I added to the music player, but I forgot to mention one thing. In the editor you got this list of objects present, and there's one button present everywhere that doesn't do anything, the background button. So let's change that. Besides solid color, I added the same system as the preset background, aka gradient and image loading. Though the image loading system is a lot simpler, and to compensate for that fact, I added a new mode, the dynamic background mode. How this works is it's a 4-corner gradient, and each corner changes its colors based on audio samples. With all the elements made and improved, I decided to go back to the pre-made templates to add some more, as I didn't add as many as I wanted to. First up, I added the third LCD template. This one had more focused on the Arduino style displays. And to really add that, I also added some text with that font that also overlapped with the other displays. Besides those, also had a regular LCD speedometer. After this one, I added a combined template that combined analog object with digital ones. The base of it is a speedometer and this little display with an odometer and a trip distance indicator. Then on this side we got a text with a current speed and then another one with trip time. I also want to note that these are not actual display elements. This is a text with special effects such as gradient for the color and some subtle edge blur. Just below that I have one more of these displays, this one being used to showing the date and time. This one was very complicated and I felt the need to make something a lot more simple, so I made the analog template. This is as simple as it gets. You got a speedometer in the center and below its needle you got an odometer. This is very satisfying if you're going at the speed of sound. After that one, I felt like I needed one more template and I was satisfied. So I made a second combined template. This one was the first one to have an actual background. At the top we got a squished speedometer, and then we got this rectangle display that shows a bunch of stuff. First we got RPM with this circular LCD around it. Here we got an odometer, total time and trip distance. And here at the bottom we got a clock and date all on LCD displays. I gotta say, the ability to scale LCD text on one axis is super cool to look at. So now I've improved all of the elements and I'm almost done. Just now we need the third testing session to double check everything is good and doesn't have immense problems the moment I touch the screen. Now this time I didn't really make any presets as I was too carried away by the pre-made templates, so I decided to make one of those pre-made templates and test that one out. However, remember what I said about wanting to make presets that look like a car dashboard? Well, that meant I had to test them out in this scenario as well. So I taped a tablet to give me the authentic experience, and I tested it out with one of the pre-made templates I made. And I gotta say, this looks incredible. Now to make the app more easy to use, I decided to make a tutorial system. Whenever you do certain actions for the first time, it'll give you some tips on how you can use an object or some other hint. Now besides the tutorial, I decided to also scrap the load image from a URL as it was easy to do on any computer. You just click copy image address. But on mobile, no matter how hard you try, you cannot get a link that Unity can load into an image. And unless you want to spend 5 minutes typing it from a computer, this is totally impractical. Another thing I changed is the menu when you select a preset. Initially there were 3 buttons, use, modify and delete. But I replaced the delete button with a more button that opens a new menu. Here you still got the delete button and a name button, but I also decided to add a new feature to this menu. When I was filming myself using a speedometer app from Google Play, I noticed that the app had a cool projector feature that I could project the screen onto a car windshield. And to get this to work, I just needed to flip the canvas on its vertical axis. So I decided to add this to my app as well, and now if you put this on a car dashboard, it will project the image onto the windshield, and I added this projector mode onto the More panel when you select a preset. I also added one more thing. When you create an LCD template, you now have this color scheme menu. Since all the LCD presets have 2 colors, the background and the actual LCD elements, to make it easier to create them effortlessly, I added a system that lets you select the 2 colors and it makes the preset with those colors. One more thing that you may have noticed is the font I used has changed. You see, the Toma font is free to use in some scenarios, but it's not free for something like an app, so I had to replace it with a different font. And one more of the preloaded fonts, the Euro style, was also not totally free to use, so I replaced it with the Lato font. Well, this is about where I'm gonna stop. I already spent far too much time on this project. However, now you will be able to find this app by using the HIO link in the description. I want to thank you for watching this video, and for now, I want to show you a full time lapse of me making this app. Please enjoy.